Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of Thoughts Unraveled. I hope you had a chance to catch the first episode. If not, you can find it on thoughtsunraveled.substack.com, where you can also subscribe. Just very briefly, again, we mentioned this in the first episode, but the purpose and format of this podcast is intentionally back to basics. While there's many great expert podcasts in the industry right now, indeed, my co-host Hugo Froesch was recently on Melissa Perry's podcast talking about OKRs. Definitely want to check out if you haven't already. We want to keep things intentionally conversational with minimal editing. You'll get our real thoughts here. We will have a general topic to discuss, but our conversation may wander down different paths, so even we don't know where that will go. And again, we'd really appreciate if you could follow us and this podcast at thoughtsunraveled.substack.com. So Hugo, why don't you quickly introduce yourself and I'll get the conversation started.
Yeah, so I'm Hugo Froesch. I'm the head of product operations at OLX, and yeah, I'm living in Portugal, originally from South Africa. And pass on over to Chris. What about yourself?
So I'm Chris. I'm an independent consultant focused on product operations. I'm based over here in London, originally from West Yorkshire, let's say that. And again, just like we discussed in the first session, myself and Hugo have known each other for a number of years. And I think usually when we have conversations, it always ends up being quite valuable to us, cathartic in some ways. Hence why we decided to do this podcast, because we want to start recording some of our conversations because we hope and believe that they'll be useful and valuable to others in the field of product operations and product development more generally.
Before you go into the topic, Chris, I just
Go
want
on.
to say that I often describe you as my human ChatGPT. This is just so useful. But anyway, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say, and I've said this before, that after my partner and my parents, Hugo is probably on the top 10 list of people I speak to most often. Definitely every day as we find ourselves wandering through our careers in product operations, I guess. So the topic for today, something that I think I've had on my mind since back at our time at Farfetch actually, and in my independent role, I speak to a lot of product operations people, generally new to the field, lesser experienced while they could be experienced in product development or product management, maybe less experienced in product ops, but also a bunch of people that are quite new to the industry in general, and therefore product operations too. And I have a lot of conversations about the product development lifecycle. Conversations, and let's start from a point of let's not get into terminology. Let's not talk about life cycles and what that means and what that looks like. But what I mean is the stages that a product team go through to understand their customers, do product discovery and research, to figure out what to build, to start to design and build things, experiment, go through QA testing, put it out in the market, get feedback from customers, iterate on that feedback to build, continuously build and iterate on the products and features that they have. So let's not get into terminology in terms of like when are we sunsetting features and products, not any of that, but the general overall product development life cycle from the beginning to the end, and that therefore being circular. In product operations, I think when it is firstly introduced to an organization, or even within the organization, they identify challenges and problems where people may start to think more about operational practices, and they may not have even hired a team, and they may not have spun up an actual function with people doing things yet. One of the first things they often either jump into or they're asked to look at is, can we visualize and map the product development process, the product development life cycle here at this company? Can we go and speak to many of the teams and visualize and map each of their processes? Maybe even getting to a stage where we try and combine many of them to make an agnostic view of how this organization in particular does product development. That's often one of the tasks that Product Ops gets tasked with. And I've definitely been in that position before and spent many an hour, week, month trying to map, trying to understand and visualize it with very little return on my personal investment or the Product Ops team's investment. I think it possibly comes from a starting point of why do we even want to map this? Like, what are we gaining from it? Why would we spend so much time? And I think what I've witnessed is when product ops teams do this, and it does take quite a while, and it seems quite cathartic. It seems like a good activity to do. It feels like it's valuable to showcase this to everybody. It very, very quickly becomes a Miro board that's never accessed again. Or back in the days when we were at Farfetch, actually, we printed it out. It was on the wall. It was actually viewed a little bit more when it was printed. But what is really the value of doing it? And is that should that be one of the first things that Product Ops does to show value, to have impact, and to do it quite quickly? My feeling is not. And while it is a valuable thing to do at some point from a team perspective, when we're thinking about operational metrics, trying to identify blockers, etc., I don't believe it should be the first thing to do, but it is always the first thing that gets asked, or in many cases the first thing. So that's the topic. So I'll throw that hot potato over to Hugo now. What are your thoughts on that? Because I know we've spoken about it recently.
Yes, yes. Well, it's various parts, right? So when you're talking about there's one which, and we can get into that later, which is around the metrics, I think, right? Because sometimes people also want to associate specific metrics or data points and things like that to the product development life cycle. But I think, going back to the basics, like you were mentioning, whenever you try mapping these things out, and we did this, right? When we did this at Farfetch, and as you map it out, you look and each team has everything in a different order, right? So every team will be doing, and then if you dig deep, you realize they're just calling it different things, but they're all doing the same thing, right? And I think what it's a thing where you're going from this very conceptual, high level thing that you want to represent as much as possible how the team works and how everything happens. But we know, right? Like you do discovery. And if you have a product development lifecycle, you expect that the discovery will be you do discovery, then you do a definition of what the problem is, maybe you ideate, etc., right? But in some cases, you do discovery, you realize, oh, we were wrong. Now we have to go explore other things. Or this one, oh, actually, you know what? We were wrong. It's a terrible thing to build. Let's stop again. And so it could go through various cycles just on that first space, right? Just various loops. Then the same thing when you, for example, come up with your first ideation. Oh, I've got 500 ideas and can go through various loops there, right? And some teams will do discovery based on what they start building something, and then they discover that, oh, there's something I don't know. So now I have to do discovery. And so if you've got that really mapped out, it's always hard, right? Because it's number one, it's hard to map out. Number two, it starts putting people in these like brackets of this is what you're going to do, and you have to. I don't know. It's not an easy one, right?
And it's also, to your point there, it always visually looks incredibly linear. Incredibly. This is where you start, this is where you're at. So when you talk about those loops, when you're like, okay, we're doing a bit of discovery, we start to build, oh, no, realize that's not the right thing, let's go back in. When you look at a visualization like this, it's always linear. And then no matter how many circles you draw and arrows you draw back, when people look at it, they think is a step-by-step process to go through. And of course, we know that product development is very messy, and yet you are going to iterate and go back through in loops. And therefore, I don't think the visual is particularly useful.
And to your point, right? I think that when we map it out and it's this whole really structured thing and everything like that, people get into the concept of I have to do it in a specific order, right? And the truth of the matter is that I think we need to focus more on why people are doing those phases, right? It's like, what do I want to answer? What do I want to accomplish to be able to move on to the next phase of launching? I mean, at the end, our end goal is to launch something that brings value to the customers, right? And we keep coming back to this topic and we'll probably bring it up 500 times, right? Which is our purpose is to bring value to customers in a way that they're willing to pay for it, which I love you added that part around the pay for it, but it's true. People want to pay for it, right? And to do that, what do you need to do? And I'll be honest, right? I've seen people hacking the process and doing anything that comes to mind at that moment. And you get moments of gold, right? And it's like, oh, but I didn't follow what person or guru X was saying I should do. It's like, did you bring that value? Yes, I did. There you go. Can you do it now consistently? Well, no, I don't know if I'll always get the same results. Well, then you just have to rethink about how you're approaching it, right? I think we always start with this thing of we get so focused on like the process, right? And this is a great example because when we did this, when we've had to do this, we get so stuck in those little minute details of the process, you forget your own end goal,
Mm.
right? And I think that's the whole point here.
Yeah, thank you also for kind of mentioning the whole purpose of building products is to get them to customers and they will do something for us. And that part is the business impact, regardless of whether it's paying or whatever. It's interesting that you just mentioned the word consistently because that phrase that I use is together we build things consistently that customers value enough to pay for. So you have all parts in there because the consistency is the key. Um, I think the interesting thing is when a product ops function picks, or people doing product operations pick this type of work up, it's usually coming from one of two places. It's either coming from the product ops team themselves, who are possibly in a place of there's so many moving things, there's so many pieces of work we could pick up that could add value. And I'm speaking to so many different people. They're telling me all the different challenges that they have. They're playing that like therapy mode, right? Where they're trying to listen and understand. And they get to a place where they go, well, I think if I map the product development lifecycle and showcase this back to everybody, I will have added value. I'll have done something. So it comes from maybe from that position first. Product ops teams don't quite know which direction to go in. They pick this thing as something they can own and showcase to the world. The other area it comes from is usually like product leadership, who say we need to understand how product development works here. We need key milestones where things happen. And when they ask that question, I think it's either interpreted or it's a very direct, you need to map the product development lifecycle to help me to understand how we do product here. But I don't think that's the answer in either case. In the first case, that's not how product ops is going to add value quickly. In the second case, a visualization like this is not going to be helping a chief product officer, in my opinion. And what I find is something that I've written briefly about and probably need to write more about is when product leadership asks questions like we need to understand how product works here, they don't mean processes because they shouldn't mean processes. They should mean a slightly higher level, either what are the principles we hold ourselves accountable to, or what are our broader practices that we have. So can you try and understand what discovery looks like here? And if it is in a time boxed linear process, maybe we need to change that and move into more continuous discovery practices. But what they don't mean is we want discovery to happen from week 1 to week 3, and then things added to Jira from a really procedural point of view. And secondly, I think teams get really worried when you start to like map things and ask them lots of questions. And while you might be coming in from a principles or practices perspective, maybe looking at some repeatable processes, they get very worried that you're down at the procedural level and you're going to tell them that product discovery has to happen. I mean, I'm using product discovery quite often because that should be, and you touched on it there, like a really creative, iterative, messy process. And as soon as an ops person comes in and goes, I need to understand how you do product discovery, and I'm going to put some processes in place, immediately they start to think, well, what does this mean? Now I can't be creative, and you're going to ask me procedures to follow, and I don't want to do that. So it's about like those like flight levels of where we're coming in and adding that value.
I think you touched on 2 points there that was super interesting. One was around we were talking about consistency, right? And I think there's a perception sometimes that consistency means that everybody works the same way, right? That's one. And it's like that isn't what consistency is. It's can you consistently produce, at least above average results or the same results on a consistent basis, right? Can you be consistent and dependable in the way you do that? But then touching on the point that you brought up, right, which is um, that teams, hold on a sec. I had a thought. I just lost it. I will come back to this. Hold on a sec.
It's unraveling, Hugo.
It's
It's
unraveling. It's
unraveling.
still
Let it
unraveling.
happen.
Hold on a sec. So we were talking about the God, the
Consistency.
consistency. Um, I've lost it. It'll come back to me. It'll come back to me. Just go.
Look, I mean, I think I understand your point from the consistency perspective. When you say words like that, or standards, as soon as you say standards, immediately people nearly always jump to, you're going to give me a series of processes and procedures I must follow every single time. And I'm sat here as a product manager, a product designer, someone on the team going, I can't do it like this because that's not how products should be built. And at the same time, in product operations, I'm sat there going, no, that's not what I mean. How do I describe this slightly differently? I've started to use different words. You know me, Hugo, like I care a lot about words and phrases and how we use them. With a previous client, I was using the word stabilize quite a lot. And what I meant by that was teams are doing a bunch of different things, and some of it's really, really great. Some of it's probably taking too much time away from them building products for customers in the business. So how do we visualize a map? I'm going back to visualizing or mapping already, a process or a set of procedures or even a practice and say, this is kind of what we expect from you. This is sort of what you should be doing. We're stabilizing it in a way that let's at least use the same terminology.
I
That's
think
it.
it's
So we can all talk at the same level.
yeah, and I think a good way of looking at it, and it's one way I try approaching it, is almost like a first principles thinking, right? Which is, what is our end goal? And then from the end goal, it's like, okay, now how do I get to that end goal, right? In the beginning, oh, I have to build this, right? Or I have to launch this. Okay, great. To be able to launch that, what do you need to do? You need to build it, right? To be able to build it, what do you need to do? And then how do you know you're building the right thing, right? And so you kind of build it backwards, right? And it's that whole thing around, is there a reason for you to build this? Because it will give you that impact. And I think people often forget this, which is they focus on the why in the beginning. Some teams are doing a great job of focusing on why they're building something, but they don't really think about that long-term goal that's going to happen at the end, right? Now, if you focus on that end goal, and this is where it's sometimes OKRs and come up, right? Which is there's an end goal I want to try and achieve. And so I'm going to work backwards to try and achieve that. But people focus on what do I want to build? Now, how am I going to write an OKR to do that? Right.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
it's a vicious circle where these things go around each other. And I think teams are focusing on the wrong thing, right? It's like, don't forget what you're doing and why you're doing it, right? And I got into a great conversation one time, which someone turned around, and something I hadn't thought about for a while, which is we're also just everybody's talking about continuous discovery, continuous delivery, and doing these things and continuous experimentation. And you're like, that's great. But there's an aspect which we forget about, right? Which is when teams go into just continuous experimentation and discovery, they start going into these small little iterative processes. And let's say, for example, you're the owner of a domain of a product, right? A small section of a product. Now, what happens is they go into this vicious loop of small incremental changes that are so small and they become smaller and smaller because the more stuff you solve, the less actual change they are making, right? And then there's like these huge potential things you can do that are being left on the side there because no, the teams are overloaded because they're working on the stuff and they're doing experimentation. But how much have you moved it? Oh, 0.05% here. And, with 1% of the users. And you're like, okay, we have to find that balance between that experimentation. It's not just only experimentation all the time, right? Um, and I think it goes back to the same thing. This is messy. This is changing, right? Depending on the context, depending on the specific things. So mapping this out is like a veritable nightmare, right? If we actually think about it, because I remember when we did this exercise at Farfetch, when we tried doing this one map and every single second person we would present it to, we would have to add either a new process, a new section, a new inputs, outputs, new info. And this thing was growing into this huge monster. And then we'd still get people telling us, oh, but it doesn't represent this. Oh, it doesn't represent my area. It doesn't represent where and you're like, oh, how am I going to represent all of that? Right. And so it becomes this crazy thing. But people think, and the truth of the matter is, it's kind of interesting because for me, I've noticed that people want autonomy. They want to work by themselves, and we've touched on this as well, right? But then there's the whole point of they want a certain level of autonomy because also I've seen people love it when I give them something really nice, all structured, and they don't have to think, right? And it's, oh, every step is down. Whereas other people will turn around and say, oh, now he's telling me everything I have to do. So, I don't think we'll ever please everyone. So,
Yeah, I mean, on that point, autonomy, I mean, we've definitely discussed this many times, and my dislike of the word because the connotations have changed, right? Originally, agile software development and autonomy to solve problems. But autonomy now, I've definitely seen it skewed in a way. It's like a team wants to decide what to build, how to do it, when to do it, and like almost why to do it. But if I've changed my mind on this now because now I realized that empowerment is a mixture of having alignment. I'm aligned to the purpose of the business. I understand my purpose in the world here. I know what we're trying to do. I have a good, strong strategy being presented to me. I understand my part of it and how I align to that, and the autonomy to build things that I think will serve the purpose of that strategy, rather than being, okay, I understand the strategy and now I'm being told what to build. And if you take either one of those things away, you're not empowered. And I ask this a lot when I give my conference talks and event talks. I always ask the crowd, what does it mean by empowered? Because everyone says I want to be empowered, and very rarely does anyone have an answer to the question apart from saying autonomy. They forget the alignment part.
But that's the thing, right? Teams are always asking for clarity, for direction, for what they need to know what they need, and they want to know exactly what are the constraints they need to work within, right? And I hate to say it, right? I've worked in companies that aren't product led, and often it's crazy, but the top person will come in, will say something like, we want to drive this, right? And you look at it and you think, I can't get behind that. That's a sales goal, or that's a, like a revenue metric or something like that. And you turn around and say, but at the same time, every person below that knows exactly what they have to try and achieve. It's not wonderful. It's not dreamy. It's not right. It's not aspirational in many cases, but you have a clarity and people, so you can see it. People are complaining, but they stop complaining about where the constraints are, where they have to play, right? Because they have that clear direction. Um, and I think, if we can give that to them, but even the autonomy part, right? It's a type of thing where people want to play around all day and everything. And I think very often what happens is they don't realize that the autonomy has to be earned. It's almost like respect,
Mm.
right? It has to be earned because in the beginning, when we start working, I'll be honest, we don't know what the hell we're doing. Let's be completely honest, right? We don't know what we're doing. And I could have done 500 courses, I don't know how many boot camps and all this stuff. But the minute you get in the actual world, you get surprised. And we saw this when we were in user experience, right? I used to tell, and I tell my students and tell people, right? Anything you build is incredible until you put it in someone's hands. At that moment, they will find new ways to use it. You will always be surprised. You will clearly always be surprised. And I think here it's the same thing, right? You don't know what you don't know. And you don't know what, so you're like, oh, I can change the world. And I've read all the books and I know. And then you're pushing back and saying, oh, we don't work the way, Melissa or Marty said, or, you're like, I get it, but you still haven't built up your skill set where you can do that efficiently, right? And so what happens is it's also sometimes that thing where they have to build up the confidence of their leaders, that they can handle that responsibility, right? And so you can't, if you're a junior, you can't expect the same amount of trust and responsibility that a senior has. And there's a reason for that, right? But even so, right, because most of the people actually doing the work, and this is maybe controversial and it's complicated, but the people doing the work, right, are juniors, mids, and seniors, right? The people, when they build up the capabilities where they're mature enough to help drive a strategy, a direction, and everything, in most cases, they stop doing the work
Mhm.
in terms of building, right? They start focusing on exactly the strategy and the thing. And so what happens is people actually building, you've got a smaller group than we actually believe we do have, right? And it's a vicious circle, right? Because at the same time, a person who's now reached that high level, what are you going to do? You're going to ask them to be doing what, an associate PM is doing. It's not fair on them, right? But at the same time, then you can't expect the quality to always keep and the autonomy to always. So it's a mix of things I'm putting out there, but
Yeah, I think you've just invited our listeners to go and now Google the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? Because that's exactly what you just described, where at the beginning of your career, because you don't know what you don't know, you think you're quite experienced and very capable, and then all of a sudden, which is, I suppose, where imposter syndrome starts to hit, when you start to learn, there is so much more to know, and you don't know 10% of it. And then eventually you get a bit more experience, and you go, there's so much more to learn, and I'm going to ignore all that because I don't need to know. I know my bit over here, and I'm really good at it. And the bits I don't know, I can bring other people in. So, yeah, for the listeners, they can go now Google Dunning-Kruger effect and see what that means.
and also
Um,
there's something around situational leadership. Also look that
yes.
up for because it exactly has that four phases, right? In the beginning, you're super enthusiastic because you're just excited about the topic, but you don't know what you don't know. So
Yeah.
it's all seems positive. The second level is now you know what you don't know. Panic starts hitting, right? Because you now realize that um, oh my goodness, this is way too much than I can take on, and you almost go into depression. The third level is where, okay, I've kind of got it. I'm starting to build some efficiently. I'm getting better, but I'm still, you can do it, but it's more mechanic. And then the top level is now I'm totally autonomous. I can do this, and I can own this completely, right? And depending on that, your approach to any topic can be completely different.
That's a really timely thing to mention because I had this conversation with a couple of people the other day around when I was working at ThoughtWorks as a consultant. One of the things we used to try and encourage was being comfortable in ambiguity, which is exactly as you described. Like at the beginning, I don't know. I don't know what it is. I don't know what we're going to do. I don't know how we're going to do it. However, being comfortable in that space that we'll learn together, and if we collaborate, we'll get to a good place. Um, there's definitely people that, and this isn't about more or less experience, because there's definitely people that I know at a more senior level that really struggle with the concept of ambiguity, and they just want a list of tasks to be defined for them with very little wiggle room to understand where to go with it, but they're going to be successful. They know they will be successful because they can tick off all these things and feel good at the end of it. And it kind of goes back to what you just mentioned there around a bit like around guardrails and knowing the space I'm able to play in, which is the alignment to your strategy. And now I know I'm autonomous within this box. And like we mentioned on our first episode, we both have come from right at the beginning of our career, graphic design, agency type work, where, like you, we used to say that when a client comes with a tight brief, you have way more freedom than when they come and say, the door is open, the world's your oyster, go and figure out what you want. It's really hard to be creative in that space. Now, when you're in an empowered team, if you have the alignment, that is your box to play in, that is your brief. And now you can go and be creative to try and figure out what it is to build there. I want to take us back a little bit in time because you started to talk about how we understand the goals of a certain piece of work that we might be picking up, and how to start and where to go, and maybe to also not go too big and be a bit more iterative. I keep coming back to these, what we used to call starting conditions. And this was when I first joined Farfetch. It might have even been before you joined. I know you joined relatively soon after me, but the starting conditions allowed the teams to have a good conversation about why they were doing the work. And I still use these today. Like I've just used them with my last client when we were working on product opportunity intake process from around the business. I was speaking to a product ops person the other day about this and how they might prioritize their team's work, because at the moment, as I was saying before, that there's so many identifiable challenges that actually you need a way to understand which direction to go in. And starting conditions always were good for us, I believe. I want to just read them out just in case the listeners haven't heard of these things before. Maybe they haven't. But the starting conditions that we used, and this was for product development work. This was like product management and discovery work rather than ops work that can be applied elsewhere. The first one is, what is the customer problem? I always used to say, you'd be surprised at how many teams don't know A, who the customer is, or B, what their problems are. But it's not surprising. The majority of organizations aren't as product led as we would like to believe they are, and they don't know how to ask that question or identify those problems. And that's the first thing you have to ask. What is the actual problem we're looking to solve? Secondly, and to your point before, what is the intended goal? Not the overall OKR, not the KPIs, but what is the goal of the team to solve the problem? How do you believe right now you may be able to solve that problem? Why does that matter to the business? As we mentioned just before, customer value has to bring business impact. There is a return on investment on your role, on your team, on your organization, and you have to have business impact, whether it's revenue or something else, cost reduction. What does success look like is the fourth question. Success not in terms of a metric, but in terms of what would a customer say to us if that problem was solved? What would we hear from customers? And finally, who is this for? Who is the specific customer we're looking at? I still fall back on these quite often when I'm talking to teams and to clients. I'm also going to add on top of that, when you take it from an operational perspective, that last question, who is this for, will often be product managers, product leadership, product teams. However, and let's now go into this unraveling of thoughts. I do not subscribe to the thought that the product managers or the product leadership are the customer of the product ops function. I believe that the product ops function has a customer, and it's still the end customer. It's still the person that is finding the value and hopefully achieving some level of business impact. The PMs and the product teams and the product leadership, there are collaborators and partners in most cases, and sometimes stakeholders as well. So yeah, I thought I'd throw that one out there too.
Yeah, I mean, look, the questions you're mentioning, the starting conditions, right? I was there when we implemented them already. So, and I use a reference very often, actually. I tell people, look, folks, it's a super simple thing, but if you give yourself those starting conditions, it's a great way of making sure you hold yourself accountable for, are we doing the right thing? Does it make sense? And, is there an end goal we're trying to shoot for, right? When you touch on the stuff of the customers, who are our customers, it's interesting, right? Because there's also where the PMs of PMing, and there's the right, but let's not go into that one. That's a whole other can of worms. But the truth of the matter is, right, at the end of the day, I agree with you, because our purpose is exactly to make sure our teams are more efficient and effective in how they deliver value to our customers. The only thing is, and that's where we have to be careful, is we have to be clear on the fact, for me, right? I think we have to be clear on the fact that we don't have a direct impact in the revenue or in that impact in the customers, right? I mean, we do, but it's not always quantifiable at the beginning, right? You're gonna argue with me. Go for it, Chris.
So
Go for
the thing that the listeners don't know, because we're going audio first with this, right? That we are actually on video, looking at each other, and like Hugo can see me like going, I'm not so sure about that one, but I will let you continue, and then I will add my thought afterwards.
Yeah, no, look, I was just going to say that sometimes what happens is it's not as easy to see that direct impact, in the sense of, I launched something and the customer at the end will get something in front of them, right? Now, what happens is, and that's why it's important, and people ask about how do you measure the value of product operations, right? And I think it's more about focusing on the differences of what we implement. What impact did that have, right? And I like to, and I'm actually going to refer to, I don't know if you've read the book of Who Does What by How Much, by Jeff Gotelf and Josh Seiden, right? The folks who wrote the
Yeah.
Lean UX book. What I love is, for them, the way they describe it is, what is the user behavior that you're expecting to change, right? And the thing here is, and that's what I like to look at it, because there you can put really clear metrics on the changes you're trying to affect, right? Because it's like, okay, they will be quicker in doing this. They will be more effective in how they do this. But how do we get that effective metric? That's a bit harder, right? But still, it closes the scope of what you're trying to measure, right? And what's the difference in the what you want to see in the end? And an interesting point, what I'm trying to do now is also looking at, okay, what's the difference you want to see in that change? But then why is it important? And how do you measure that? Why is it important?
Mhm.
Right? Because it's the end, because, and it maybe goes to the point where you're bringing up, which about the customer, right? The direct customer, and maybe that's where you'll correct me on that, which is, or at least add your perspective, which is, at the end of the day, we want to see that impact on how they're dealing with customers or how they're bringing value to customers. So by focusing on that, it actually brings more value to what I'm trying to do, right? Then if I'm focusing on, oh, the teams will be more efficient. And it's like, but they're still pushing out, let's say everything that they're pushing out is at the same quality, but now they're more efficient in doing it. It's like, they're not being innovative. Am I doing my job right? Right? These types of things. But go ahead, Chris, go ahead.
No, I think the question of what impact is product operations having, or let's change that. What impact is product ops as a function having, because we've hired people and we want a return on our investment? It comes up so often, and I think a few years ago in 2018, 19, when we started on this journey, I think it was a bit of a murky kind of world of going, well, do we need some hard measures, operational metrics? And this goes back to how do we visualize the product development lifecycle? If we can identify lead time takes 2 weeks, if we get it down to a week and a half, is that good? Is that not good? Is that down to us or not down to us? Do we need hard metrics, or do we need qualitative metrics where we can go and speak to people and they can come back and we've got like, yes, things feel better. Yes, we're more confident about doing X, or we're more efficient over here. Or simply is it, we did not have an operating model for something and now we have it. Without product ops as a function, we would not have had this, or we would have taken people away from the product org, the ones building things for customers in the business, and we would have to shift their focus onto this operational thing because we didn't have it. So I think there's different ways you can measure. I think I have like a really nice example now of where the work that a product ops team did had direct business impact after they introduced the process that was introduced. So in many like SaaS enterprise organizations, the way that those organizations are set up, that you have like a global product platform team, they're building the global product platform, and business units, or organizations that are still under the umbrella of the main company are operating individually, and they have a real direct line to the customer. The global product team, platform team, doesn't always have that direct line. It can be sometimes a little bit more challenging. The business units have a direct line to the customer, and the customer is the person who's paying for the enterprise software. They also have a direct line to their end customer, and that feedback loop is ongoing. And the sales team, the marketing team, the enablement teams, the customer success teams in those units are having an ongoing conversation with their customers at various levels, and they're coming up with product opportunities. They're coming up with ideas to change the product. Now, that can often be quite localized, and they have to try and level up and think, okay, how do we impact this from a global perspective? But all those ideas and opportunities have to flow through into the global team, product team, in a streamlined way, but also having all the rituals and practices on the team's side to investigate, to value map, to dependency map, to understand whether building this thing is going to be a good thing or not. That's often just called a intake process, right? So intaking opportunities from around all the business units in all the various countries, being able to prioritize them, understand them, prioritize them. Does it align to our strategy? Is this something we should be picking up? Do we think this is a good opportunity? And if we spend the next month building it, is it going to drive the customer value globally, not just locally, and therefore some business impact? So Product Ops came in, and I led this project with a recent client, introduced, actually, interestingly, using the starting conditions as a basis, introduced a process that allowed the managing directors across the business units to submit a number of opportunities every month that the global product team had a regular cadence of rituals around to discuss and understand whether it aligned to strategy from a leadership perspective, to value map to understand, is this really going to be value for our global customer base, to dependency map to understand whether they should build these things, or if we're going to be blocked to provide the teams or the work that's happening, and then to get things onto the roadmap. So we built that whole process, and I know that something that, and in the past, by the way, before this existed, the product manager spent a lot of time speaking to the business units and being bombarded with requests to do things that range from, this is a bug we just found, can you fix it, to this is a global opportunity for like global increase in revenue. So it's very hard to understand the difference between these things when you're bombarded. When we introduced this process, we streamlined everything. And we know that it had taken them a couple of years to really act on any opportunities in the past. And now they were able to act within the quarter to deliver something to a specific business unit that enabled them to increase their revenue with current customers and to find new ones. So because of the work Product Ops did, you can now link that all the way through to the end customer value of the users, of the companies that have hired this software, and to the business impact for that particular business unit, and maybe some incremental impact for other business units as well. Now, without Product Ops, would that have still happened? Yes, maybe it would. It probably wouldn't have happened in the same time frame, and it would have taken away either product leadership or a product teams or product managers away from their work to figure out how to have this process. And to add on top of that, and maybe we can kind of close on this as well, the repeatability wouldn't have existed. It would have been one product team doing it in the way they think works. And the repeatability of these things, these processes, these practices, drives a consistency that you mentioned before. And it means that when a new product team comes on or new people join the business, they can very quickly get into this way of working and can continue to drive that business impact. So that was my example.
No, that's a great example. That's a great example. And don't get me wrong. Look, I've seen where we can create, value directly with the customers. It's not always as straightforward. Like, right? You have to we have to go with a proxy metric or at least something in the middle, right? Or sometimes we're measuring by an impact we will have today that will later become a customer impact, right? And sometimes some of the things we implement, we will only start seeing the results after 6 months, sometimes even longer, right? Ideally, no, but we know these things happen, right? Even considering that product operations accelerates that process to implement any of the stuff. The truth of the matter is some of these things, it's habit changing, right? And so those habits changing and becoming regular, and having gone through those changes, we've seen that, right? Where you implement something and in the beginning, it seems like it's a mess. Everybody's freaking out. It's overly complicated, or you've added too much things. People will push against every little point of the process and everything, right? And it's like, okay, we get it. And
And it's also a shared metric. So the example I gave, product operations had a part to play in that, but it was the team who built those products. It was a team that iterated and experimented and measured. So there's a shared metric there.
well, that's the point I wanted to bring up, right? Because to an extent, we know that. So product leaders, product teams, right? They're always doing their own iterations and implementing their stuff as well to try and improve the way they work and improve the way they're doing, bringing value, right? And so that's where it also becomes harder to exactly get direct metrics on some of the stuff product ops does because it's not like an A/B test where I'm the only one sending out that A/B test, right? And I did a small change and I can easily see this is how it worked before, this is how it works now, and customers are working better, right? In this case, it's like I did a change, but there were another 5 changes from the team, from the head of the director, the this and that and everything. The correlation worked really well and it came out nicely, right? But if which piece, and this is sometimes the hard part, right? Which piece, if we took it out, would everything would fall apart. And that's not, and that's where we try and find if we can replicate that and across other parts of the organization, right? Like, is it just this formula, or can we implement just one or two of these things and still have similar results, right? It's a challenge. And I think that's one of the challenges, and we can get into that in another conversation, right? Because I think that's a whole conversation on itself, right? Which is exactly how we see that, how we can decide on what that impact is. And
Yeah, and that's that. I guess back to my example, that's a good example of end business impact that we can now link to, which is great. So next month I can't say that anymore because actually that thing is in place. It seems to be working well, and that now comes to what can we remove, what can we add. Therefore, have to remove something to make this more efficient. So the whole end-to-end process from when a business unit identifies insights from customers through to something being built and back into customers' hands can still take a quarter or more to do that whole thing. So how do we reduce it down to a month? How do we get that collaboration and communication in a better place? And can product ops help in that space and then continue to have impact? But now it's more regular impact. So this is now a different type of impact that ops is having.
no, and it goes back to your initial point, right? Which everything is always constantly changing. So how the hell can we map out one single way of doing things, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And look, I've tried it depending on the context, how things are structured, the people in the team, the cultures, the everything that exists. All the approaches have to constantly keep changing. And so the product development life cycle, like we were discussing in the beginning, it's hard for it to be exactly always the same, right? And we can't force teams to do that. And we've seen that where we talk to one team, they work one way, another team works another way. Both of them are equally efficient, but they work in totally different ways, right? And it's like the end result is the same. That's fine, right? And
Yeah, and this is going back to the point about repeatability, right? Repeatability does not mean that I have to have a standardized process for every single team so that when a new team joins, they can just repeat that process. Repeatability still has to be iterative. It still has to have building blocks rather than procedures. There will be times for procedures, right? If you're working in like a product support team. There has to be a more procedural process put in place where this is where you log your support tickets and issues and bugs, or critical incidents have to have quite a lot of procedures around them from legal and regulatory perspectives. Of course, that's fine. But the repeatability of practices is a different beast to take on for product ops, I think, because that has to continue to evolve and iterate, and we have to be on top of those things to make sure that the teams understand them, and therefore it can be repeated.
Yeah, and I think we can next time go into metrics, because I think there's a whole thing around, for example, very often, and it's the result of trying to get that consistency, is because people want to be able to put a label on, I'm at this maturity level. Or understand at what maturity level different teams or different groups are at, and understand where they need to fix things, right? Which is a point you made at the beginning. And
Yep.
then they want metrics, and you can't get metrics if you don't have certain levels of consistency, right? Or not consistency, but certain levels of repeatability, or certain things that are exactly the same, right? So
And
then
every team is building something different. They've all got their levels of capability, experience, building different products and features for different customers. They've got different leadership in some cases. So
in some cases different tech stacks,
yeah,
right? So all of it is cool.
cool. So did we unravel our thoughts there? I think we did, because we started off on a place, went down a couple of rabbit holes, and then kind of somewhat came back, I think.
I tried bringing it back. I tried pulling it back, but
Well, yeah, thanks everyone again for listening. As always, I think when myself and Hugo get talking, it's quite hard to stop. I'm looking at the clock and being like, maybe we should wrap this one up. But the thing is, at the end of this conversation, we've got about 4 or 5 other threads to pull on. To be honest, there's various conversations we can go down.
And that's the thing. I purposely thought, let's talk about them, but let's not go into them, because each one of them could be an hour-long
Yeah.
conversation potentially. But this is how it works. We're unraveling the thoughts as they go.
This is how we wanted it to be. This is how we wanted it to be. So
yeah, so hopefully people enjoy it.
I think, as we mentioned on the first episode as well, I don't even remember when we launched the first one. This podcast won't really be happening on a regular cadence. It's really when myself and Hugo find the time in our busy schedules to chat together. So we'll release them once recorded. We'll release them pretty quickly. And again, if you can follow us on thoughtsunraveled.substack.com, and keep an eye out for the next episode.
And we're also on Spotify.
We are.
So if you want to subscribe there.
Or your favorite podcast listening app. Cool. Thanks, Hugo. And again, thanks everyone for listening.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Thanks, folks.